Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know the Penguin, episode 8, the season finale, A Great or Little Thing. My name is Grace Leeder, but of course, I'm not alone. I'm here with a great thing, not a little thing. It's Mike Bloom. How you doing?
Oh boy, well, let's not get into, it's an HBO show, Grace, but let's not get into that territory. I'm thrilled. This was such a big conclusion to a show that, again, we keep saying seemed like it was speeding up, much like Oz's purple car. It finally parked, and what a park job on it! It was able to
Mm.
pull off the very tricky parallel parking job. Had a lot of places, a lot of characters that they needed to either finish up or have them land in, a place that could leave a lot of things open for the future. So I'm not only excited to break down the present here, Grace, and where we leave things, but given a couple of connections and name drops and symbol
hmm
drops of the future for both this series and the Matt Reeves Batman universe in general.
Yeah, not so subtle bat signal in the air at the end of the episode, but that's
Yeah,
okay.
for all those
You know,
people that like, if you hate Oz Cobb, don't worry. Remember, there's a guy that's just gonna beat him to a bloody pulp every chance he gets.
it's very true. Well, speaking of not so subtle, if you could subscribe to the We Know Scripted TV feed, we would very much appreciate it. Subscribe and make sure you're set to auto download. Tell a friend. Ratings and reviews are appreciated. We're also on YouTube, and you can check all of those links out at weknowscriptedtv.com to make sure you're subscribed. Lots of fun stuff happening even as we are wrapping up the Penguin. Yeah, I mean, full on. This episode is like, yeah, this is a villain. This is a villain story. This is the
Yeah,
villain.
it's like, yeah, did you all forget that the show was called The Penguin? Yeah, of course, it's gonna end up with The Penguin on top.
Yeah, which makes it seem silly that we were pondering the whole time about like whether he would die or not. But I still do think this was a really well told story, and one that I think it is a pretty satisfying conclusion in terms of the story that I think that they were trying to tell, and a story that I think Lauren LaFranc told pretty exceptionally well. Of which this is kind of how they build it originally, and then I think you kind of get lost in the weeds as you're watching it. But it was basically like, how does Oswald Cobb become the Penguin? How does he become Gotham's like underworld crime boss? And I feel like this was so well done in terms of thematically of seeing, we talked a lot about how dark last episode was, getting the reveal of what happened to Oz's brother, and seeing that sort of bubble to the surface, and this being the last thing sort of here in terms of like, how can he get out of this situation? Because it just seems to be the driving force behind him is taking care of his mom, and like, can he possibly confront this realization of like, maybe that's all like bravado and fluff, like it's make believe. And I feel like the show is like, he could do it. He'll figure out how to like, phony his way through all of this to do whatever he needs to do to become successful and powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it all makes sense that it's essentially, metaphorically and literally, Oz kind of burning his life away as Oz Cobb. And much like a famous rendition of the Penguin bit off somebody's nose, this is Oz cutting off his nose, but not necessarily to spite his face. More so to say, like, yeah, well, if they punch you in the face, the biggest place that could hit you is your nose. So if I cut off my
Mm.
nose, then that means they can't hit me. Even though we see at the end, there's like a little bit of a nose
Mm-hmm.
still left. I thought it was, to your point, it was one of those V8 moments where you're like, yeah, of course this is how it's going to end. I mean, I had prognosticated last week that I did think we were going to get either the image or the metaphor of Oz making his way onto the throne, but essentially piled on top of all the bodies of people that came before him. And it shows that it's lonely at the top, that Oz realized that as much as he had an incredibly demented way of his heart working, he did throw his heart a lot behind some of the decisions that he was doing. And by the end, he had to realize that he was kind of doing it for himself. It's almost like the Breaking Bad series finale, and that but his
Mm.
hand was forced a little bit, and he's like, yeah, I can't really do it for my mom anymore. All those dreams I said I'd accomplish for her, yeah, I'll wheel her vegetative hospital bed up to it, but now I'm doing it just for me at this point. And to watch Oz Cobb kind of leave, any last vestiges of his family is left behind, including the fact that he kills basically the last quote unquote member of his family. And one of them is basically dying at that point. And then he assumes the role of the Penguin. The fact that we see him in, these schlubby kind of suits off the rack throughout most of the series
Mhm.
until this episode where we see in a few stages from, his threadbare threads that he has to ditch in order to sew himself up from the stab wound
Mhm.
versus like the pretty dressed up, look that he brings to the city councilman, to the final, more iconically associated image of Oz with like a nice tux with a top hat, just missing that cane and that monocle, goes to show how he is essentially changing outfits and changing identities as well. That as much as we realized last episode that Oz really is that selfish prick that so many characters have made him out to be from a disturbingly young age, there are still some things that he would do in pursuit of that selfishness, but still under the belief of like, well, I have to do this if I want to be successful.
Yeah, I feel like you made this really good point last week because I was talking about identity and the ways in which that both Sophia and Oz, to a point, were willing to, you know, um, take advantage or leave anybody in their wake in this pursuit of proving that they were not who people thought they were. I think
Hmm.
that Sophia has this moment last week where she realizes the way she had been going about that was making her act exactly as her father was, and that she was continuing to do that. And ultimately what ends up happening here is in this final confrontation, over the course of this episode between Sophia and Oz, is that that's how Oz wins this fight, is that he is sort of willing to sacrifice anything and everything in order to fulfill this belief of who he needs to be, in order to make the lie that I think even he told himself to be true. Like, I think what's very interesting this episode is that there's this really heart-wrenching scene where Sophia is telling Oz, tell your mom that you killed your brothers, and he will not say it. And Francis is like, I know you did it. You can just say it. It's okay. And still, over the course of this episode, Oz never says he does that.
Yeah.
He never admits it. He will never let that be the truth of the situation, the truth that he has to have in his mind. And why I think this is very strong writing is that, like, as I said last week, there's this world in which, like, Oz can, even when that happened, he can justify it to a degree because they were
Yep.
the ones like bullying him, and so they got what they deserved. And it is like the city and the place who killed his brothers, not him. And so he chooses to believe that, as opposed to Sophia, who basically throughout the end of this, like, the reason she ends up not being able to be in control of Gotham's drug world is because she does not let herself be succumb to all of the things that happen to everybody else who lets them do it. And then therefore, yeah, we talked about this a lot in like the show Succession, or I talked about it in Industry, of like, the better you are at this thing, probably the worse person you are.
Exactly.
And
Yeah, it
the
requires
real
a
way
bit of
to win is to leave. Yeah.
the more human you are, the less good you are at this job.
Yeah.
Because it does take a significant weight on your morality, and not to say that like Sophia was overwhelmed by the morality of all, and that caused her to be like, "Yeah, I'm giving it all up and I'm leaving." But I think certainly her morality had her come to terms with what she was doing, whereas Oz very much sunk into the abyss. I mean, we'll get into it. I think it's a very interesting final exchange between the two, where Oz is like, "You did a bad thing, Sophia. You're going to hell." And Sophia correctly says, like, "I'll save you a seat." Like,
Yeah.
do you not think that you did probably just as bad, if not worse stuff than I did? Do you truly delude yourself into thinking that you are not a bad person, that because you quote unquote were doing it for your mother the entire time, that that's going to have you seated at the right seat of God should you finally, cross over into the next phase of life? Maybe this makes the most sense, Grace, if we kind of go through a little chronologically
I was
in
just
this.
thinking this. Yeah.
Starting chronologically from some further light shed through flashback here. First off, again, as someone whose kink is the mind palace, I love the effect of putting Deidre O'Connell like quite literally in her shoes as a younger version of herself, not only to
Yeah.
bring
Very
out
good.
more of this incredible performer, but again to like relive the experience through her eyes. But again, this is why the show is so great at toying with our emotions, because last week, Grace, here I was flapping my gums on this podcast being like, God, Frances is such a victim. She's
Mhm.
undergone so much trauma. That's what's really had her calcified to the world and saying that she deserves everything that was brought to her because of everything that she suffered. And look, it's a pretty damn impossible choice to basically be told, like, yeah, your son is this immoral psychopath. So you could either have this mobster basically kill him, or you could live alongside him and basically try to, rein him in. And the decision that she ultimately makes to not have Rex kill Oz, you could say on the one hand, it's the devil you know is better than the devil you don't, to the fact that she quite literally calls Oz the devil, that maybe she does believe Rex's logic a little bit, that like,
Mhm.
if she is his kryptonite, then that means he will do anything for her. And so she has a bit of free reign as to get him to do certain things based on, well, if you did this, it would make me happy. If you don't, then it doesn't. But I gotta go back to the read that this is also speaking to that selfishness. That again, the needle's going a bit back for me of, okay, this isn't somebody who is a complete victim in all of this. That she did like the attention, that she did like the idea of this unwavering loyalty of someone that promised her the moon, and that even in the wake of all this, knowing that her son did the unthinkable, he is promising to get her a life that she has dreamed of up to this point. And that gets reconciled a little bit in the present, but who knew, Grace? Even more revelations from these flashbacks.
Yeah, I mean, I do feel like the idea that there are these only two options is a real maybe Sophia's choice, and that like I guess you either have to kill him or make him become a useful member of the mob, and it's like there are other choices. But as
Mhm.
far as Francis can see, and as far as Rex is laying out the options, those are the two options. And so what I think is really again, what I think is strong is that I do think the best shows really enhance a rewatch of the show. And I have not gone back
Mm.
and rewatched this show, but I do think this provides a ton of insight into as Francis is struggling with dementia. There are these two sides of her that we're seeing, where you
Yes.
see the side that will listen to the music and have a night out and likes to dress up and wants the jewelry and the nice dress. And then you have the version where she hates Oz and is like is mad. And then there in the midst of that, like there's so much of like, no, you have to go and do this. And the reason that almost like I feel like she like where that comes from in terms of being like, no, Oz, you have to go and like do all these things that you have to do when you're a criminal underlord is like, yeah, those were the two choices. Like, and if he doesn't become successful at that thing, then choosing to for her choice, letting him live despite having him killed her other or her kids is a worthless thing that she did. Like it's this is
Right.
all super dark and super like depressing and horrific. But it's like you can then see where when she's like urging him on to do these awful things, it's like, of course, with the decision that she made, she needs him to do that. And then when she has these moments where she's like seems to be happy, it's that like yeah, at least she can like forget. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree either in terms of
Exactly.
the way in which the person that Oz becomes at the end of the show. You can kind of see how that was enabled by Francis, and Francis probably got enabled to be that person by somebody else, and by living in Gotham and all of the stuff, which is that like if you can be rich and have a night out at the club and wear a nice dress, maybe all the bad thing like that's really easy to be like blinded by all of the bad stuff you had to do to get there. And I thought that this is like extremely powerful in the way that we open up this. And I totally agree with you. I love the like having it be Deidre O'Connell be in the scene as Francis with Rex. But gosh, how horrific that it's like she up until the point that Oz makes a little speech to her, she was gonna send him home with Rex and have him killed.
I mean, hurt people hurt
Uh,
people.
Yeah.
And it is interesting in that, again, we had assumed that Francis, for years and years, had been aloof and just gone along with the story of like, yeah, they went to the movies and then they drowned, but she knew pretty much from the jump that Oswald was the one behind it. And yeah, to your point, it completely recolors the way that she regards this guy. And you talk about turning a blind eye, but I really think the theme of Oz and why he is so successful. This guy will try 26 different pitches, plans A to Z to figure out what he gets, what he wants. But the one that almost always works is plan C. I
Yeah.
see you. You
Yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
seen. I mean, that's what he says in this scene, right? When he goes into like this entire when Harry met Sally esque monologue to his mother of like, I notice when you laugh, when you see that nothing's funny, when you wrinkle your nose at this,
You
etc.,
smoke
etc.
more when you're thinking, it's a great monologue here from this actor. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing that from our read gives Francis pause, is that realizing like, oh, this is somebody that for the first time maybe in her life does appreciate her for who she is and doesn't just look her over. And we'll see later on in the present, it's arguably the thing that saves Oz's life without him realizing it and stages like a gang-wide revolution, essentially, is that yeah, all of the kind of like populist credos he was espousing about how people are up in their ivory towers not caring about you. I do. You know, it still seems it's a little bullshit because the entire reason why he was trying to get in a better lot of life for himself was just purely due to selfish reasons, not to help everyone else around him.
Sure.
But it's a message that works. And I think it speaks to how universal that can be, no matter how much the ends justify the means.
Yeah, I mean, the piece of I see you and I hear you. The other thing of like this like dream that becomes so central to the end of the episode is that she'll live in the penthouse, nobody above you, nobody beside you,
Mm.
is a thing she says when they're about to watch the movie when it's raining, right? She's like, "Oh God, I wish I lived in a penthouse because then you'd have nobody beside you and nobody above you." And that drives Oz, and he uses it at the end of this little speech, like young Oz being like, I'm going to get you the penthouse, the expensive clothes and all the jewelry. Like, yeah, it's so, it really is the, the key to his success. And he ultimately leads to the moment later, like the way that he basically is able to like outmaneuver Sophia at the end, that he's able to use, very funny that that guy's name is Link. That is like
Yeah.
that the Link, that saves him. But yeah, I mean, that's where we go to next, basically, after we cut back from like the flashback is like um, Vic and trying to, and this is also, I think, like a tremendous tragedy
Yeah, I
of,
know, that's the thing, especially finding out about Vic, who, like, despite the fact that he does kill Squid, I still think through his last moment is kind of presented as, like, this innocent kid who was a byproduct of the environment that he was around and the neglect, and then was taken in by essentially the Scorpion, right?
yeah.
Of being led along the entire time that he would not get stung, that he was special, but got so close to him that all he could do was get stung.
Yeah, and he like is so mad at all when they go when they're gonna drive to the city and they see that the sewer has been blown up, and he's like, and they're like, we're here for the drugs, not for us. And he's so mad. He's like, you're cowards. Like it's like it's the connection to the people that is like what like, but which is like up until that point been so true for Vic and
Yeah,
Oz. But like it has been their connection. Like Vic messes up a ton, like so much in over the course of this show in terms of like not from like he's a bad guy, from a like he's not a very good, like he's not like the best mobster we've
yeah,
ever seen.
he's
He's
not a great gangster to start off. There's growing pains.
sure, but he often like he's with Frances often when she gets like when she get like right like he gets knocked out. He's sleeping one time when Oz comes home. Like there's all these ways in which like he's not just this incredible, yeah, but what he does have is like he is incredibly loyal to Oz, and we'll see later how there is a type of loyalty that's too dangerous to have
Exactly.
around. So I thought that was really, that was really strong.
Yeah, I mean, I
Um,
think that's what it is, and not to cut too much to that huge moment, but like,
yeah,
not only is that like the end of innocence, I think in multiple ways for both Oz and Vic, but like, it's the difference between kind of coworkers and family. And I think Oz's logic, and you see it in Colin Farrell's performance when Vic's like, "Oh, you're basically family." Oz, at least my read is he thinks, "Oh, I wish you hadn't have said that."
I know.
Because basically that implies familiarity, and Oz is speaking out loud. He's like, "Yeah, I mean, you've been there with me through some of my most vulnerable moments, and in order to become the person I want to be, I can't have any vulnerabilities. The last one that I had is basically on her deathbed at this point, and I have to kind of dispose of anybody that can expose that weakness to anybody. And so, Vic, if you are somebody who I think you are, that is like me, that wants to work their way in, considering that I have exploited other people's weaknesses for gain, who's to say you won't either? It's an incredibly tragic decision, not only obviously on Vic's part, but on Oz's as well, because much like with Sophia, it goes to show that sometimes the people that are most likely to betray you are the ones that are closest to you and see you as not necessarily someone who, blood being thicker than water, more so like blood's diluting the water and needs to be pumped out.
Yeah, I mean, this episode sets all of this up so perfectly, I think, in terms of where this moment comes and what I thought was so strong, like thematically and powerful about the scene is that like I should have seen it coming. And we talked at the very beginning of of when we were doing episode 1 about like, does Vic die? And we didn't draft Vic as somebody who we thought would die. And last week we had this debate about whether Sophia dies, not
Mhm.
whether Vic dies. And like we talked about it, but it's like it wasn't like let's decide, let's debate. Like it was just kind of like maybe not, whatever. I think that this death is so powerful too. It's like it's almost like I know he's the penguin, but it's like the last shedding of skin of like of
Yep.
from Oz going from who he was to becoming like the Batman villain, the Penguin. This is the
Yes.
moment where it taps into something that that this his superpower that you said earlier of like seeing people and being able to understand and connect with people is exactly why he needs to eliminate anybody who would potentially do the same thing to him. He can't
Exactly.
train somebody to become who he is because they will see right through him. And it's only that like his mom is in a vegetative state, which I also want to talk about that when we get there. Um, uh, that he has to eliminate Vic. And you know what the most horrific thing is that Oz actually had invited me, Mike, to go to the Olive Garden. And he said, when we're here, we're family. And I said, I cannot actually go to the Olive Garden with
Well,
you.
I mean, quite literally a bullet dodge, Grace. It was a
That's
trap.
right. That's right. Okay, so just cutting back a little bit,
Yeah,
I want to
so
talk about
let's go to
yeah.
Monroe's. Because yeah,
Yes,
there's
yes.
because this is, I mean, like it's really interesting to see how this episode is paced because it starts with arguably like the emotional climax besides the Vic death of the episode,
Yes.
which was very interesting for the rest of it because it's like, wait, why is he going to City Hall? What's going on here? It very much actually reminded me of that first episode when it's like, why are we spending so much time with Oz doing all these random things only
Yeah.
for then the rug to get pulled out from under us and Sophia by the end of it here? But this is just incredibly invigorating. First, like, listen, Emmys all around for this show, but I hope costume design gets recognized because first off, Sophia's like Betty Rizzo
Yes.
looks are
Yes.
incredible, but especially this one with the black dress and the red ascot. I mean, it's so incredible, right? Considering how much we have talked about her clawing at her neck, the
Yeah.
scratch marks along it, for her to not only be wearing that, but also it kind of taking the form of a noose as well, representing her fully taking the mantle of the hangman.
Well, it's the noose. It's also a way in which like she still has like scars on her like shoulder, but it's a
Mm,
way in which like we saw her when she would be so covered up and then she like was freed from that and it's almost like she's reverting back to like there being a reversion back into like that's not me. Like she tried to own it to become, and now she's at this point where she's like, I'm going to leave. I am going to like. I guess at this point we don't exactly know, but yeah, this costume design is pretty incredible in terms of like the aspect of being like a noose, but also like it is both revealing and hiding at the. It's a combo of like the themes of her clothing so far in the show.
yeah. So this is when Sophia is trying to just bring everything out in the open, and Oz
The
is
baby bird monologue is very good for of like, oh god, it's the penguin, and she's talking about the baby bird who drops the older bird of
But
the.
I also love the lampshade that she's like, yeah, it's a little on the nose.
It's
Like,
so
I
good. It's
apologize
so
about
good.
that. But as much as we think, again, much like with a lot of the show, things are going in one direction that like Sophia is gonna press Oz so much that he finally confesses. It ends up being Francis, and it's this terrible moment for Oz where Oz was gonna let his mom's finger get cut off just to keep his lie going. And whether or not, again, to your earlier point, it's just like frank denial after years upon years of this, or it is just him continuing to think that I just need to keep digging this hole and somehow I'll dig my way out. It is definitely a breaking point between the two, and it will also serve as the last time that these two characters really interact with each other. And it is in a major way, as Frances has hit her breaking point. Like, it's so interesting to see Colin Farrell's performance just in general with this episode, but like comparing the pure fury he gives Frances upon her admitting that she already knows about what he did versus like him weeping profusely over her body, begging her to finally tell him that she's proud of him. Just such a range of emotion from this incredibly complicated relationship.
Yeah, what's really strong is that I think that this works so well from what the show is trying to say, which is this moment where the cigar cutter is on Frances's finger, and Oz won't effing say that he killed his brothers. He won't do it. He will not. And it is this theme that everybody has been saying, and this is like this thing the whole time of, because Sophia is technically, I think, the like antagonist of the show, and and Oz is our protagonist, that you're not really sure whether you're supposed to think it's true. But this thing he keeps saying, and because I think we've had Vic and his mom of like, he will betray anybody to get what he wants. And in this moment, this is for me, like between this and then when he kills Vic, these are the two best examples of like, that was true the whole time.
Right. There's
like,
there's no exceptions to the rule here.
There's nothing that Oz won't do or say that will save himself versus what else. And in this moment, what's kind of like so tragic and why it works so well as not just what the show is trying to do, but as a deep character moment, is the only thing he is trying to save in this moment is the image of the version of himself and the story he has told himself and his mom for 30, 40, however old Oz is. I don't know how old Oz is. He maybe looks older than
what if
he
he
is.
was like 25 years old and just like,
Mom, that was 5 years ago, mom. But yeah, this is brutal. Again, I think that this show, I feel like every episode we've come out and I feel like I'm like, oh my God, this scene. I feel like this is probably this or the Vic scene for me this episode, and then the final scene. Like, there's like 3 moments this episode, and then you could almost put, I think, the last Sophia moment on there too, that I'm like, these are so good. These are so strong.
Oh, good. Yeah. I mean, that monologue, right? I had enough to give all 3 of you.
Oh
You didn't
my
have to leave them
God.
down there. They were my babies, my world. You're a disappointment. You're a waste of space. I wake up every goddamn day sick that I'm your mother. She's right. She's effing right. I should have let Rex kill you when I had the chance. And then she quite literally adds injury to insult by stabbing him afterwards. And again, it's so interesting in that the way we read Oz, and maybe there was a couple of reads about this final scene as to like, okay, is Oz sort of getting the last word in by like leaving her basically as a prisoner within her own body? But like, it seems like otherwise he is just in deny that any of this happened, despite the fact that his mother is approaching him to his face and saying, everything Sophia is saying is right. I hate you. You are an absolutely abhorrent person. I know you killed your brothers. And you have done everything for me, and I hate you for it, and I wish you were dead. And he still has to keep going. And again, it goes back to what I said before. He feels that he has dug such a hole for himself. The only thing he can keep doing is digging further and further until he is just surrounded by darkness, and there is no light ahead of him.
What I think is, again, so the show uses everything at its disposal that it put it in there. But there's a moment that I think justifies why Oz would pick up his mom and bring her with her. Not just that.
Now look at this. Is this like they talk about mom strength? Is this son strength that he could break through the duct tape Hulk style?
There's mom strength, isn't there? There is like, I mean, he's not a baby, but I mean, he kind of is a big baby. But isn't there like baby? Is that like, that's like a whole plot of like Maggie and the Simpsons, I think, right? Like,
he went full Jack.
Yeah. Which is that I think the way that Oz can justify what his mom just said to him, and that his mom stabs him with a bottle. She doesn't just like yell at him, which is like, yes, she does, but she also literally stabs him in the stomach, which is that he says, you have dementia, basically.
Yeah,
Like
like, oh,
you
that's
are,
your disease talking.
and to me, that allows because I think in this whole thing, we talked about Oz being Tony last week, and I still think that that metaphor is so good in terms of, I guess it's a simile, which is that he can take everything that's in front of him and try to rearrange the story in whatever way he needs it to be. So, for example, with his mom's dementia, that can both be the way that he can say, well, what she's saying is not true. It can
Exactly.
also be the way in which he can play stories in which he almost is a victim. Like, it's like, if only she wasn't losing her mind, she would just be so happy for me and she'd be able to have the, because he does the same thing when he's talking with Vic later about his brothers, where
Yeah.
he says, like, if only I could have just seen the men that they were going to become. And it's like, bro,
Well,
like,
yeah, and I love that conversation. And Vic's like talks about missing his family. He's like, "Oh man, I miss them so much." And Oz just goes, "Yeah."
yeah, me
And the
too.
pause is so freaking pregnant if you know the context. But for Vic, he's just in his feels and that whiskey that it doesn't matter.
And I think for me, like, the thing last week is, like, when I was talking about, like, there being, like, a defense of Oz, doing what he did, is that, like, if this is a show that's not about the making of a villain, you're, like, watching these scenes being like, this is and how do you, like, if a kid is like this, how do you move them on the path? Like I said, the thing where, so sorry, Francis is like, we either got to kill him or make him a crime boss, and we're like, not really. And in this situation, like, it's just terrific. But the show is fully the villainization. Like, how does he go from A to B? And so, yeah, this scene where it's like, why he picks up his mom, because there's another world, right, where he can just, like, let the idea, because he does not know that she is going to have a stroke and not
Right.
remember any of this stuff, but he does believe that there's a way that he could still, even if she's saying all this stuff and saying, you're the devil and I hate you, when they leave, that he will try to, like, I talked about Sophia gaslighting last week, and I talked about them being two sides of the same trolley coin, is that, like, he gaslights his own mom here to be like, no, it's your dementia, like, you're misremembering everything. And that's what makes this scene, I think, so brutal to watch, and for me, so, like, engaging as a television viewer in terms of what the story they're trying to tell here.
What did you make of seemingly Francis's last vision before she has this stroke and collapses, which is of the dripping wet versions
Oh,
of Jack and Betty? Do you think this is like something she frequently saw whenever she would have her episodes, and now we're finally visualizing it now that we're seeing more behind her eyes? I see you. Or do you think this is like, okay, she has now finally like let all these demons out, and now it's almost like the end of Les Mis, the ghosts from the past are coming to kind of welcome her over to the other side?
that is very interesting. I hadn't thought about it. Part of it is probably, and this will sound like a critique, but it's not a critique, because I think that the story was unveiled to us perfectly, I think, in terms of when
Mm,
we got information. But they basically couldn't really do this before, because we never knew that Francis, like, we didn't know that Oz did it, and then we didn't know that Francis knew that he did it. So in terms of, like, when you would have seen, and I also, like, this is probably the best example of where, like, they, and I would be interested to go back and see, is there anything that when she is having moments, is there any sense of, what is it? It's like her talking with Vic might be places where there might be some very
yeah, like there
interesting.
there there are times where she's saying like, "Oh, Jack, do this," or like the
Right.
first time when like Vic is sent to go take care of
Oh,
her, she
I
like,
wonder if he ever said, like, you're soaking wet. Like, I wonder if Vic ever came in like,
"Why are you
that's it.
so wet?"
Well,
Because
a
the
little bit on it. Yeah, but I guess she's not really as, like, horrified during those moments, right? She does seem to be like, it's like, what a nice moment to have,
it's
like,
more
my
nuisance.
Jackie boy.
I will also say like going back a little bit. We're not going to give away MVPs and LVPs here, but Rex Calabrese kind of seemed like a bit of a stand-up guy from a certain perspective. Like, yes,
Rex? The
he
guy who was gonna kill Oz?
but for a reason, like he actually did seem
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah,
he
yeah.
did seem legitimately concerned about Francis when he dropped by and visited her. He
But
wasn't just like, I have a
I
plan for this.
okay, I agree. There's a world where, like, in the context, like, the one thing I put in, I think you put in the context, and why I'm like, why don't they just take us to social services? Like we see that the Gia is, like, put in, like, a
Yeah.
locked room, like, right. So it's not like in the world that Gotham exists, you have to have the context that, like, the infrastructure of this city is like, it's like a rundown like, and especially if you're from like this area of the city, not that you're rich, like there might be stuff for you, but not in this area. So like the options of like social services don't exist. So the
No,
idea,
the
and
world of the Batman is the most anti-establishment universe in pop
right,
culture history. Like
right,
the police are corrupt, the government's corrupt, the mob is corrupt, the Arkham's corrupt, the group home is corrupt to the point where the only person that can get the city to a place where it needs to be is this mass
right.
vigilante.
Right. And so the idea that like Rex would even be like, we could like send him to like Gotham Juvie or whatever, is like that's also not so like I hear what you're saying in terms of like not trusting the justice system. Rex is gonna be like, what we could do is like you get rid of the kid, he's gonna be a major problem. So I agree that he's not what I would say, and your point is like there's a chance that like I don't vote for Rex to be LVP of the episode. It's about the highest praise I'm willing to give him, because probably Oz gets LVP episode, for just being the worst person. But
Yeah. So this is when Oz and Vic finally connect, right? And Vic truly shows how much she has swung into everything that Oz has promised him, which is also very interesting because, again, this is a line, not even just I see you, but Oz also sort of like promising everyone the moon. And this is something that we've seen from the very beginning of like, oh, don't worry, Sophia, I'll get you this. We'll do bliss together, and then you'll be able to run your own empire. Vic, you want to be like one of the richest guys in town? Great, I'll have that for you. And it shows that like Vic has truly become corrupted or drinking the Kool-Aid that Oz provided, and that like Vic is the one to give the big rousing 11 o'clock speech of how like you can't just sit on your duff. There are people here that believe in you, and so we have to make sure that like we may be cornered, but we can fight our way out of anything.
what's funny is actually like if this show is like called The Hangman, and it's about, and like it's a more like and like Sophia and Vic are like, Vic is actually probably in the end more like Sophia than he is Oz,
Mm.
right? Because the ways in which like I think that Oz does see that he could be good but ultimately needs to decide to get rid of him are actually very Sophia things, where it's like giving people dignity, like the way in which like for a lot of Vic stuff is like this like found family, which like that is a big of like Sophia's like your family doesn't have to be your family, and actually you can just rename yourself and be a Gigante, and you don't have to be a Falcone. Like there's actually a way in which like in a alternate like I think What If is coming out from like in a What If version of the Penguin, like there's this very interesting I think like Sophia Vic thing that actually like ultimately I think why they both end up arriving to the fate they do, which is that Sophia gets sent to prison and Vic dies, is because they're actually very similar. So but
Hmm.
yeah, this like rousing of Oz to go after and ultimately setting the plan in motion, which I also love this because in my head the moment before Oz kills him I was like, ooh, what a juicy potential season 2 where Vic is in the exact situation that all of these other people that they convinced to rebel against their leader are
Yeah.
in. Like Link kills Zhao, like all of these people kill the boss, and I'm like, that's the situation that Vic's going to be in. And like if this show comes back, how fun. And then Oz basically seeps into my mind and is like, you shouldn't have said that, Grace. And he kills
Well,
Vic to
yeah,
like get rid of him.
that's the
Yeah.
thing with like sometimes with these populist leaders, like, oh yes, power to the people, but like also look at me. Like I'm representing you, but I'm still a bit separate from you. And that, yeah, it would be really interesting moving forward if Vic had been kept in of like, even with all of these kind of assistants killing their bosses, like what's going to stop the person beneath them from killing the assistant who's now the new boss
100%.
once they like don't get a 3-day weekend or something? Like
100%.
what kind of attitude does that foist of, oh, and not
Do you
to
think
say
the
that,
drug dealers get the weekend off, Mike?
oh, well, I guess weekends are when
Or
they
are they
work
like,
the
is this more
most.
like a restaurant where it's like the Monday we're off, like Monday,
Yeah,
Tuesday we're
exactly.
off?
Like there's
Yeah.
slow periods, I think. They
Hmm.
do shifts. But I do think it is interesting in that I don't want to necessarily advocate for I want to advocate for workers' rights. And I do think, again, the reason why this prevails so much that it is like basically a group wide coup is that people do feel like they've had the boots on their necks. And
It's
like
a GRU. It's a
yeah,
GRU. Group
a
and
group.
GRU are spelled the same, but they're
And there were a lot of minions here that do take over.
that's right. That's right.
And so but I do think it's interesting because it's just like the revelation that Sophia has, right? Of like, I thought I was breaking down one institution, but then when I restarted another one, it was the exact same one as I had been left in. Because that's all I know is that institution, as much as I hated it. You could see that within gangs. It's really interesting. I think when I first read Freakonomics, and this was
Mm.
like 25 years ago or
Yeah.
something like that. Like there is one of the first chapters is about like why do some drug dealers live with their mothers? And it's because you think, oh, on paper, these people are selling all these drugs for high exorbitant amounts of money. They should all be rolling in it. But there exists almost a corporate hierarchy within gangs, that there are drug lords and there are lieutenants, much like the mob entirely. And so no matter what, even if you think, okay, I'm going to join this to, make a name for myself, make some money for myself, you still have to work your way up the ranks, just like you were if you had, put on a suit and tie and gone to an office building. And so,
Yeah.
no matter what, it's going to be a shared grievance, because as much as you think you're bucking the establishment, screw you, cops, I'm selling drugs under the table, you still have to answer to somebody at the end of the day. And so, you're still going to feel that boot on your neck.
Yeah. Okay, I think, Mike, the rest of the episode, I think in terms of the things we haven't talked about, I think are very interesting to talk about, in the sense that I thought that this is one of the best executed, and no pun intended, because one of the scenes here is that Oz kills Vic, he executes him, is what to me feels like set up for whatever comes next. And that doesn't mean necessarily the Penguin season 2. It could mean the Batman. That's a very explicit call out at the end of the movie. But this does feel like this thing that sometimes you get to the end of the show and you're like, oh, that was all to, like, they did that thing because they want to have, they know somebody else is coming to play in the sandbox, essentially, right?
I mean, you could call Marvel out by name. It's okay.
Sure,
We're a
sure.
DC show. We can rag on them a little bit.
Sure. I actually will say I need to double check. I did not watch for a post-credit scene, Mike, and I don't know if you I turned off the episodes. I maybe should go back and just double check that as we're talking, because I definitely, when the credits rolled, I was like, okay,
Yeah, the post-credit scene is Colin Farrell. They say cut, and he just rips off all his prosthetics,
yeah.
being like, "Thick fucking god."
Yeah. Okay, so there's a few things in here, and I feel like we can sort of but let's maybe start with Oz going to City Hall and revisiting
Yes.
Councilman Haiti and laying out this story of how he wants the story to be told and what benefit comes from that. And that all turns out to be true. That's what gets said on television. And there is this like one moment that I feel like for me was the most like, we don't do anything with it by the end of the episode, and it's fully like, in case we return, some point, is him looking at Bella Real up on the top, like he's down below and she's up above. But essentially there's going to be this, like, Hades going to go out and be like, actually it was just the same old Falcones and Maronis at each other's throats. That's what happened, don't worry, it's all cleaned up, blah 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 blah. And then Oz has a free invite to work back with City Hall, and he does see this moment of like staring down Bella Real at the end of the episode, or not the
Yeah.
end of the episode, at the end of the scene. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it's very interesting. Of course, the first thing that comes to my mind is the entire plot of like the middle act of Batman
Yep.
Returns, right? Where the
Yep.
Penguin comes out of the sewer and announces that he wants to run for mayor against Man Shrek, and he does. Obviously, I think this is going to be a less cartoony version of it, but I think it also speaks to Oz's desire for power, right? That
Yeah.
he has feasibly gotten everything that he's wanted now, except for maybe his mother's approval, like what he's been working for so long, which is to be the crime kingpin of Gotham. He has arrived at this point. So what's next? He can't be happy with that. And so I think he wants to now have control over Gotham, not just behind the scenes, but in front of the camera as well. I love the fact, and especially the idea that it does come through as successful with, first of all, his bullshitting just being perfect for politics as well, right? That
Mm-hmm.
it makes so much sense. This is a guy that was able to talk his way out of anything. It works so well in the world of politics, where it just basically thrives in double talk and, shaking hands underneath the table to get things done for your own betterment, making deals that help better other people's successes. I was surprised that the councilman ends up showing up here, which is interesting because, I don't know how we're going to move forward with this character, but he could be an interesting role to play just in the Gotham government. But it's interesting to It's interesting for Oz to be able to utilize a prior existing narrative to forge a new one for himself, if that
Yep.
makes sense. That he is able to sell Occam's razor to the councilman and ergo to Gotham, which is, oh yeah, remember the hangman, this big mass murderer, the lady got out of the loony bin? Surprise, surprise, a tiger can't
Mhm.
change its stripes. She killed a bunch of people. She wanted revenge on the Maronis because, they helped kill her family. And so
Mhm.
she blew them all to high heaven, and he's able to do some very nice plot connections of like, if CSI Gotham goes down there, they could find little bits of Maroni sprinkled everywhere.
And
It
her
just
car. And her
in
car.
her car, it just all connects so nicely where he is able to really spin a huge misfortune that ended the episode into an opportunity for him. And I also really love the irony that, not to say that Sophia doesn't have culpability the second time she's arrested, but once again, she is the fall woman,
Yeah.
having at least a good
It's
amount of blame
thematic.
saddled to her for something
Yeah.
that she did not do.
Yeah. No, this is pretty good. This is pretty fun. Also, the where they place people, so how they film this, which is Oz above Haiti, and then when he's out in the hall, he's down below, and Bella Real is up at the top of the stairs. There's a different version of that you would film face to face,
Mhm.
whatever. But they choose to play with these, like, the show is about power dynamics. They're choosing to play with who is above who and who's controlling who. He's literally holding, like, he has, like, it's not a judge's gavel, it's the councilman gavel, but
Right.
essentially it's a judge's gavel where he's in charge. Here it's very well done in terms of like how it's shot thematically, and this to me all feels like, full on, like, when we return, here it is. It also does kind of like, at the same time, it's why I think it's very impressive, is that it does feel like it does tie up this particular story of, we're not left being like, well, wouldn't Oz just get, like, framed for what happened? Like, we set up everything so that actually by the end of this episode, you can kind of feel like this whole story of, like, Oz in the middle of the Falcons and the Maronis actually does feel like it's quite wrapped up in a way that I think this is the best version of leaving things open because you play in the sandbox while also wrapping up the story you just told. And I love the last line of, like, him being he's like, you're gonna get subpoenaed. You're gonna get subpoenaed for all this. Like, Real is on anti-corruption. He's like, you have to look clean. And he just says, as an effing whistle.
Yeah,
Says it.
and
So,
so it goes to show that, yeah, he is quite literally washing his hands of this
yeah,
situation, right? Like,
yeah,
now from a narrative perspective, the Falcons and Maronis just took each other out. Crime is done in Gotham, and now it is Oz being able to take advantage of that power vacuum, what he has been trying to do for the entire first half of the season. There was a while where he got caught, where he essentially, basically got a knife held to his neck, both proverbially and literally, but he was able to escape, successfully pin it on both of them, while everyone who can speak up against it is either dead or incarcerated, and is now able to step up, but do it in a way that it can't be pinned on him. Something like what would happen to to like a Carmine Falcone or a Salvatore Maroni. Of, now I have goons that will get blamed for all the stuff that I'm doing. I'm just an upstanding Councilman Cobb.
yeah. I want to, at some point, I want to talk about, there's kind of like two Sophia things here, which is like the sort of burning of her dad's stuff and the
Hmm.
portrait and the house, then leading her to go to the airport where she thinks she's going to get Oz, but she gets duped again. I love that little smile that Oz has as he realizes, like, you have walked into my trap.
Yeah,
It's
and then
very
the
good.
reaction that she has. I mean, she can't do anything in time because poor, Feng Zhao, he loses more than his arm. He loses his
Yeah.
life, Francois Chow, in dying here. But it is really like the shots of smiles in this episode between these two characters are so fascinating because,
Yeah.
like, Oz's smile is like, I got you. And then Sophia's smile towards what she thinks is her death is more so of acceptance, of like,
Yes.
and even the one that she has as her home burns, where she's like, she is quite literally the dog in the meme of, this is fine. Like, I'm good. I am officially now disposing of everything. Again, my revelation last episode was that how can I truly separate myself from the Falcone family and be a Gigante if I'm still living in the house, if I'm still dealing with the same goons, if I'm still utilizing the same tactics? I truly have to burn it all down and start over from scratch. And so to have her family quite literally go up in flames is what she has been doing, again, metaphorically, ever since she got out of Arkham, but really put a nice bullet point at the end of it. I also do love for some reason, the reality that she has Feng Zhao in her contacts on her phone, that he shows up on caller ID, really
Mhm.
tickled me, Grace, for whatever
Yeah.
reason.
Well, yeah, she's not hiding anything. Yeah. Um, okay, so then this last scene where she gets, which is great. There's a world where we talked a lot last week, like, does she die? She does not die. And I do feel like I feel like they justify not killing Sophia here by Oz needs to have there's so many animal metaphors. He needs a carrot for City Hall. They need, like, I guess you could try to, like, wrap this up by being like, and they all died. But I think
Yeah.
that there is something that works about, like, letting them have this victory of, like, no, we caught Sophia and we know it's Sophia and we're locking her back up. It also is in there to basically be like, if we want this character to return, she can. And then I don't, if you want to talk about the scene anymore at all, I feel like it is just pretty strong and I like it. We've talked
Yeah.
a
No,
little bit about it.
I mean, listen, they also hammer it home, like, how great the parallelism is, that Oz is the one to drive Sophia out
Oh, I
there, and
love that. And then
including
again, they're also like old time. Like, I literally wrote in my notes, like, Oz drives Sophia like old times, and he goes, like the good old days. Like, yeah.
yeah, but it's an interesting way in which they leave each other, because Sophia at this point isn't like, "Oh no, oh no, oh no, you
No.
got me, please, please free me,
Right.
Mr. Penguin." Like, she is fully fine, at least from my perspective, of her dying at this point. Like, yes, she got. Ideally, she would have escaped. She is yet again captured, but, like, she's still dressing him down because she knows how much. And maybe another reason why Oz ends up putting her away is because she knows basically, like, all the things that made him tick up to this point. He says, "Oswald Cobb, man of the people. That's what you need to believe." Huh?
Yep.
Basically being like, "Yeah, I know you're delusional at this point, but guess what? You and I both know your mother never loved you. And that's something that you could tell yourself so many times, but you're never going to believe it. I didn't see you, but she did. She knew from the very beginning. You have always been a monster." And again, it's tough. We'll talk about this with Francis, of like, did Francis's final words still stick with Oz? The fact that she wasn't able to follow it up with what Oz wanted, which is like, "Hooray, honey, you did it. I love you now. Forget everything I told you before I stabbed you with a broken bottle." Like, Sophia is right in what happened, which is also maybe a reason why she is fully ready to get her brains blown out in this perspective. But instead, you would say something much, much worse. There is a bit of a parenthetical, which we will get into, as she is sent back to Arkham. And obviously, as we found out from episode 4, this place forever changed her, traumatized her in so many ways, and she goes back there. And it also makes a lot of sense from the meta perspective as well. Even in the Batman, Grace, the Riddler doesn't die. He just gets sent to Arkham. That seems to be like a cardinal rule in no matter how gritty you get with your Batman adaptations, the villains almost always never die. Harvey Dent might be like the sole exception to that.
Yeah, I'm this is tough because it's like, this is Matt Reeves's Batman, and unfortunately, it's not Lauren LaFranc's Batman. There's a world where she thinks the most fitting end um for Sophia is a death, but this is one of those things where, when you, again, I'm going back to the sandbox, but when you're playing in the sandbox, sometimes you have to leave the toys in there unless you
Yeah.
get the sign off from, like, Matt Reeves that, like, yeah, you can kill Sophia. And I think, like, this is the challenge always, is like, I don't know. I could make the argument that it would have been a more satisfying end for her to have been killed. I actually don't know if I actually believe that. I actually think that this is the most satisfying ending. And I want to talk about a little bit what you said about, like, the way in which she speaks truth at the end. Um, but she was so great in this performance that it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, I kind of want to see more of her as the Hangman. If this means she gets to show up in the Batman Part 2,
That's
like,
the thing. Yeah.
pretty happy with it.
If Gordon drops by Arkham to interrogate somebody and we just get a cameo of like
Yep.
Kristen Milioti showing up being like, "Hey, what you doing? What's going on?" I
Well,
mean,
we connect her with another character here, Mike, and
well,
we don't know what is said.
and that's the interesting thing as well, is that, the thought of her ending did haunt me, as much as her stairs were haunting towards
I
the end of that, because it's like, oh my God, she's going right back here. Like, she doesn't even have the bliss of getting killed now at this point. Instead, she's going to wind up like that person that she was meant to fight on that very first day, of like, just kill me, just do it. But maybe Oz made a mistake in that for someone who thought that she had burned any last vestiges of her family and was truly alone, there might be more connective tissue that lifts her out of her ennui.
Well, the one thing I just wanted to say as we leave that scene where she tells us is I actually think it again shows that she was not she she's not I feel bad saying this, but she's like not made out to be the crime boss, because I do think in this situation, if she either wanted to get out of it by like not being sent to prison or being killed by Oz, or if she actually is ready to like be killed by Oz, what she says I think is not what she should have said. And I see that being like the truth doesn't actually work on Oz. Saying this thing of like there's this world in which like we've seen it sometimes where he's like pushed to anger of being like, okay,
Mhm.
and then like because I think that's part of it of like hoping that he'll do that. But he still doesn't really believe what she's saying is true. He doesn't believe she's saying she's saying the truth. And actually the way to like he almost needs to hear something from her that proves that she's a benefit to him to have around to continue to exist and to be there. And so because she doesn't and she says stuff that he's like, well, no, he ultimately in this choice lets her like be kidnapped. I gotta say I think that the way it was shot and the way Kristen Milioti
Well, she wasn't
acts
shot, that was the thing.
true. The way that she acted, this scene where she's in prison is, I just think, remarkable face acting. And there are a few
Yeah.
actors out there who I'm like, there is a way that they could just do things with their face that so few other people. I'm a big Olivia Colman. I think Olivia Colman is
Yeah.
one of our greatest face actors. There's just these people who can look away. The stark contrast to the way that she looks when she is in control and she's mad or upset, and like so much of the show that we've seen her, to the complete like loss of any joy or happiness, just
Yeah.
those giant eyes being sad was like crushing to me as she's
Yeah.
like, and then it slowly transforms into like, and I'm like, intrigue, happiness, skepticism as she's reading the letter. And I think it's like all in there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you pointed out the eyes because I do think we benefit from the fact that she kind of has those like Margaret Keane-esque eyes
There's
to
no
her that
makeup on them this time, so it's just she just looks this like she looks like a sad puppy, and it's
that's the
so
thing,
sad.
yeah, and it's so interesting because like the eyes are the windows to the soul, as Winston Churchill once said, and so it allows us throughout Kristen Miliotti's sensational performance so much access into like what she's feeling in that moment. You know, like Sophia was never somebody who had the best poker face, and so whenever we saw that she was angry, or whenever she was angry, we could see it. Whenever she was unhappy, we could see it. And again, what's so interesting is the fact that to your point, if Sophia wanted to get away with it, maybe she could have said something. But I think at that point, like her burning her family estate, yes, in an ideal world, she would have just gotten away, gone somewhere else, get on that bus with Graciela. But like she was also, in my opinion, fine dying as well.
I
Because
agree.
for her, she's like, yeah, this isn't the game I want to play. I mean, look at the fact that she offered up a bounty on Oz's head in exchange for just giving everything away. Like she is Scrooge waking up after a Christmas Carol, being like, "This doesn't matter at all. I'm gonna give it away to everybody
Did you know
else."
that there's an original Christmas Carol that's not? Oh, I guess Scrooge is. I had I was thinking Scrooge McDuck, but he is just also Scrooge in the actual. Never mind.
Big
That's a
Joe, why don't you take all me gold coins in the vault?
um.
No, the boys drowned in the vault. There were too many gold coins.
I do think
What
there's a.
happened
I
to
don't,
Huey and Dewey?
and also
Louis
all of these coins are just trolley tickets for a
Yeah.
trolley that doesn't exist
Man,
anymore.
this is the darkest version of DuckTales I could have imagined. There's only
Um,
one surviving nephew.
So the other thing too, I think here is that like there's a level of like as much as she wants to be a gigante and be someone different, there's a way in which like this trauma perpetuates and there's no escaping. Which is, and unfortunately, I think it's like the same for like Gia. I actually do think like I don't know that we're gonna be like in the world where it's like we're at the Marvel period right now where it was like this is the son of this Marvel character.
Right,
Like
Young
we're getting
Avengers.
we're getting there. I don't think that we'll get there with. Actually, I was listening to a podcast the other day that was like, wouldn't it be fun if we were actually in a Batman universe for long enough that we could get to all the fun stuff people like who listen to the comics are like, it'd be great if we could get to that story that only happens like once Batman's been around for like 15 years, but unfortunately we just like keep rebooting the Batman.
Yeah, we need a Batman Beyond where we get like
I know.
old over the hill Bruce Wayne educating a young whippersnapper to follow in his footsteps.
I know there's so much there, but I just I think like Gia is somebody who I think is similarly like going to be like, she can't really escape. She doesn't have to name herself or be like be a Falcone, but she will always be haunted by the fact that she comes from a family that is the Falcones that treated each other like that. So I think Sophia's in the exact same situation where like a death is like, there really is no, and again, I say this with a caveat of like, in this world, in this Gotham world where like there is no like, nobody goes to therapy unless you go to like an evil villain therapist.
All right, yeah, can we talk about that for a second? 'Cause I guess let's like also just formally tie up the Sophia side of things.
Yes.
She's pretty much quite literally left by herself. I don't know. I guess is there just such a shortage of good psychiatric help at Arkham that like Dr. Rush, who apparently left in a rush from Arkham, is like, you know what? I changed my mind. I think I'm coming back.
Yeah, this is a little. I kind of wish there was like I wanted a little nicer of bow on Dr. Rush. I think because I think that like as soon as I had the thing and like at the end of our episode 7 recap of like, oh, he's gonna do the red light therapy on Francis to get the information. I was like, that works. But yeah, this like him leaving and choosing and why he's there and why he helps Sophia, I think is probably the like, because part of where he's, which I guess he kind of okay. I'm almost talking myself into it, Mike, which is that he kind of proves and turns out to be basically exactly what Sophia said he was at the beginning, which he is somebody who he basically has this weird like control issue thing where he both wants to be like in the bedroom, he wants to be like, he wants to do BDSM and be like the victim of that, but what he actually then craves is like to be in control and to have power. So it does actually, I think, track that like she, again, in the theme of like, I see you, I see who you are, she does kind of clock him for who he is. She uses him for his utility up until the point that she, and maybe this is a scene that we need, is like, I actually don't need you, bro. Like I'm like, you're part of the problem. And then he is back in Gotham, like clearly like, or he's just there as a thread of like, in the movie she needs to escape, who would help him escape, who would help her escape? Dr. Julian.
Yeah, she's got a guy on the inside now. And maybe he could also have been like, no, I have the most access to her, like I can be her handler in a way that nobody else wants to. But what is also interesting is outside of the Selina Kyle connection, which we'll definitely get into, it seems that Sophia has fans. Like she's getting letters. This is very different than the Sophia in Arkham 1.0, where everyone had essentially disowned her. Her family signed affidavits to get her behind bars and cut off all contact. It seems like much in a smaller way than the Riddler, who had like basically, drudged up an entire group of incels to carry out his domestic terrorist plots. I wouldn't say there are like copycats out there, but it sounds like from what Rush was kind of reading through with this deluge of letters that like people are actually writing into Sophia, which is very interesting.
Well, this seems to be I think this seems to be a theme that like Batman and the Batman likes to do, which is that when Batman creates martyrs, this is a giant like Joker, right? Of like, you by like, and this is not the Batman doing this, is ironically like the Penguin ended up doing this. But this to me all feels like there is stuff in here that like, again, I say this is one of the best executed versions of like, we need to leave the door open, which you shouldn't do at Arkham. You should leave all the doors closed.
I mean, that's how is that how she got out in the first place?
Yeah,
because someone just left the door open.
I think so. And then they're like, well, she like, nobody locked the door, it's legal, she could leave. Which is
damn,
that, like,
this Gotham Constitution.
To me, these, I don't, this is, again, once again, it's going to sound like a critique and it's not a critique. These kind of feel like Matt Reeves notes of like, can you do this in case we're going to use Kristen Milotti in the movie? And he has some theme about like how she actually becomes a martyr because everyone realizes, because if you're going to then set up the Penguin as a, like, I can very much see the world because Selina Kyle has a connection to Batman and we don't know what's on the letter. If you can see the world where like the Hangman gets looped in because she understands the Penguin, like if the Penguin is going to be the next Batman villain, you can see where like the Hangman becomes pretty important in terms of like information, we're talking about detective Batman information. So that's kind of how I see why those threads were left were left open.
Yeah. So let's talk about this connection because, again, for those that might not remember the Batman or didn't
I
see it,
forgot that this was a true fact when it's
I
like,
mean,
it's your half
listen, I
sister.
had watched it right before watching this, and I totally forgot as well. So I definitely dropped the ball in not remembering this. That there is another Falcone child out there, and Selena Kyle, who is played by Zoe Kravitz in the Batman, her entire mo, why she helps Batman out for the majority of the movie, is because she wants to get revenge on Carmine Falcone, who is her
That's right.
father. That her father had like basically copulated with her mother, who I think was working still at the Iceberg Lounge or was like one of these, lower life types of people, and essentially had left her high and dry. And so she wanted revenge. It gets to a point where like they have Falcone right where they want him, but then she shows up and goes a little too revenge happy, and then he ends up escaping before getting shot. And Selena Kyle, unlike Sophia Falcone, does get away. The entire end of the
Yep.
Batman is of the two of them riding motorcycles side by side, and then they diverge their paths, and she does leave Gotham. But this is really interesting. I mean, obviously, this is a spiritual anchor for Sophia. And of course, the irony that this was somebody who had wanted nothing to do with her family to the point that she changed her last name. And like, now this is the thing that is anchoring her back into the real world. It's this idea that there is somebody else out there who probably hates Carmine Falcone, maybe not as equally, but a little bit less than her, is enough to lift her spirits. But, we don't know really, I think, any casting news about the Batman Part 2. It's too far away, TOO far away. But I do think that if they choose to either bring back Zoe Kravitz, this is a way to do it. Or if they want a character to basically like involve her in the story off screen, this is another easy way to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of what we've seen so far, in terms of the best guess in terms of a timeline for the movie, we're not looking at a The Batman Part 2 release until December 2026. So we are 2+ years away from that movie because it has not started filming. There's been no casting rumors. We just know that it's happening. So a long way, and I think ultimately that mostly then puts me mostly in the bucket of like, I really don't know how much we can make out of what this means for the end of the Penguin, because
Right.
they could rewrite the script like 6 times before they start filming it. So it's like there could be a version of the script where this is super important. What I think works about it again is that it ties up this
Yeah.
story of Sophia not having family, um then only have somebody who we know is a hero in the story of the Batman to be reaching out to her, and there to be something there. They could then turn that on their head and be like, actually, Sophia hates Selena Kyle.
Yeah.
Like you are my dad's, whatever. Like there's a world where like that they subvert those expectations of like what I read into this of like how nice that somebody is reaching out. And again, the themes of the show, like I think that what I most, if I have to put something on the letter until I know what the letter is, it has to be Selena seeing Sophia and believing that Sophia is not responsible for everything that has been accused. Her whole point is that Sophia does not like her father and knows what her father did. Well, Selena's whole story in the Batman is like, my dad is the worst. So to me, that's what I read into that scene of like, and I think it's kind of actually a touching, beautiful thing to have in there. So I quite like that.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the last scene, which arguably I don't know if it's the best scene, but this is going to stick with me for a very long time, which is Oz showing up in the tux. And what I love about this scene, Mike, is that again, sometimes I do this thing where it's like, another show would have done this. And what I mean by that is like a show that I think would have done this scene more poorly would have had the penthouse be the most beautiful place you've ever seen. It
Yeah.
would be immaculate. That's not what this is. This is fully like in progress,
Yep.
like not finished. There's a
The neon sign
chandelier.
isn't lit up all the way.
Oh, it's beautiful, Mike. The chandelier is like at like eye level of like it's not been put up. Like this is so thematically strong to have him walking through the penthouse he always promised his mom. She walks into an empty room where she's looking out the window. I do want to ask you in the scene before we get to the scene with Eve, because I think this was incredible stingers of the episode.
Oh, so demented. I loved it.
Me too. Is Oz comes into his mom and basically again gives the like, I did it, Ma. I did it for you. And she sheds a tear. I don't think that I think I do what do you make of, because there's a world where you could be like, she is the I don't want to, I need to say this in the most polite way, which is like, is she faking this illness? Which I
Oh
would
my
not
god, imagine if she's like jumping around and then as soon as Oz like the keys in the door, she's like, oh, get back into it. No,
eh,
I'm a vegetable.
that's the amusing version. I think the sad version is like literally like she just like cannot stand to she just can't, and so there's this teardrop that comes. I don't know, what do you read of is it just like, it's just like she's just somebody, she's in there, she can hear, she can understand this whole thing, like it can just be that. It's pretty
No,
strong, this last scene.
I think it's that. I think it's incredibly tragic, and honestly, she probably wishes she was Vic at this point. I mean, she says that to Oz at a certain point, right? Earlier in the season. She says, like, my mind ain't what it used to be. Just promise me if I get to this point where I'm a vegetable,
Oh
you
yeah, I
kill
forgot
me.
about that. I did forget
And
about that.
he does not. And so I
He
think
makes her sit in the thing and stare out the window.
which
Yeah,
is interesting
brutal.
because again, like you could weigh that decision in a couple of ways. This could be spoiler alert for The Boys season 3, but that was a plot point at the beginning where Aya Cash's character Stormfront is like horrifically burned and assumed dead, but
Oh
Homelander
yeah,
is
that's
actually
gross.
like keeping her privately squirreled away because he like needs that emotional check-in basically. Or it could be Oz trying to get the last laugh on his mother as well, that he is a vindictive son of a bitch and is like,
No,
oh, you want to die?
yeah.
I'm not going to let you die. I mean, it's tough because like
No, I think
he'll have,
it has to be the like, this is the story I told myself. Like, I think.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but I think what's interesting is that Francis is a living example of be careful what you wish for, or you just might get it. Of like
Yeah.
her being able to enable this guy for so long just to get this penthouse, and now she has, but it comes at what cost of her being like a prisoner in so many ways of her absolute psychopath of a son who has now like is now taking over the city and she can't do a thing about it. Like it's an incredibly haunting ending for the character, at least from my read of it. But it is
No,
interesting.
I'm fully we all make mistakes. She's not faking it. This is the perfect fit. This is the storytelling
She's not going to
thing
be
of
like
like,
Grandpa Joe when she has to go
no.
to the chocolate factory. And I do think as well, again, from Oz's perspective, it is interesting that this was a guy who kills Vic because he's basically like, no loose ends. You know, you can't be soft out there. You got to get rid of anything that might make you vulnerable. But like, he still not only has his mother behind the scenes, but he is like, from my read of Eve's expressions behind his back, like basically forcing and coercing her to play out this incredibly demented Freudian fantasy of like, well, my mom couldn't tell me directly that she's proud of me, so you're going to do it for me, right, Eve?
Yeah, so I think my argument with like, is she faking, is like, or not, is like, what's the most, because I think that again, what do they most want to tell us, which is that Oz is a villain. And so I think you're right. The fact that and I forgot about the vegetative stuff. I really did. So it's like the fact that she was like, kill me if I ever get to this point. Now he chooses not to in order to live out the story that he always told, I think you're exactly right. And then, yeah, we get this like extra stinger on top that is so gross and weird, where Eve is wearing the dress that she wore to Monroe's, and he makes her say that she loves him and that she's proud of him. And she calls him a beautiful boy. Gotham's yours, sweetheart. There's
Yeah,
nothing standing in your way. And he says, goddamn right. And we cut out and the bat signal flares up. It's
I
is a
mean,
great ending.
it's such a great ending because it shows like what we've learned about Oscobb, which is
Yes.
interesting because again, when he was coming into this, we all kind of had the same intrigues, which is okay, obviously we know the character, but like the version in the Batman was in a few scenes as comic relief. Who is this guy? By the end of this, we know who Oscobb is, which is this incredibly delusional, destructive man who will do whatever it takes to fulfill this absolutely wild purpose, which is to make his mother happy at the end of the day, whatever that might mean. And we talk about the themes of identity and taking on roles that are provided to us. And we get a version of it right here at the end, as he's not even referring to Eve by her name. He is saying, I did it, Ma. Tell me this, tell me that. She is now sort of trapped in her own prison of like this conscripted role play where she has to pretend to be the person that Oz needs validation from. And so, you know, I feel for Sophia, I feel for Francis, and I feel a lot for Eve too. This was somebody that ends up getting roped back in Oz's life, and also speaks again to this sort of like interesting hypocrisy of Oz doing all this stuff in the 11th hour of the finale, killing Vic, keeping his mom in a coma to basically be like, no, 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 I have to make sure that any connections I have that people can utilize with me are promptly severed so that I am this hardened state of a man that cannot be broken through. Yet, in this penthouse, he is making this woman dress up and play out his mommy fantasy so that he gets the validation he so desperately seeks, showcases the weakness that he possesses on a psychological level, and then the physical representation of that weakness shows in the sky as, oh yeah, he is an arch villain of the Batman.
Yeah, I think saving that piece for like the Batman has not really been mentioned other than episode 1, and that's to set up like the setting of the show of like Crown
Mhm.
Point being flooded and what happened with the Riddler, and then to sort of like we knew it was a Batman show, but to basically like in the universe of the show really have forgotten that until it's like this is a Batman villain. I thought this was excellently done. I'm interested about like I think that this we talked about last week. You were like, "Oh yeah, Oz is a psychopath," which I think is true. I guess maybe I need Dr. Amanda's help, which is like
Mm,
I think mostly he's a narcissist. Like he's somebody who he has a sense of like entitlement about like because I think like
yeah,
you can argue the thing about his mom is that he's like making her dream come true. What he's actually doing is making his own dream come true. Like he's
exactly.
actually making the story true that he was the one, and that it was again this thing last week that he had to justify that if his brothers were around, he would have never been able to be the one to like rise to the occasion and become
Mhm.
who he needed to be. And that he's the one who gave his mom the penthouse and the jewelry and the necklace. And so he has this narcissism to him, and then probably whatever else, whether he's like a psychopath or sociopath. I don't know which one he is, but I feel like
Some sort of
narcissism is
path.
like he is on some path of
Yeah.
like yeah, narcissism to me is like the defining trait of this man of like he thinks he should just get whatever he what he thinks he deserves. And I feel like he's like yeah, he's like again we talked a lot about gaslighting, but I feel like he just keeps trying to like convince himself that that's true, and he'll do whatever he needs to do to make that seem real. So I thought this was an exceptional ending to this
Yeah.
season of television.
I think it really accomplished and reminded us of the purpose of this as well, which is like this show didn't exactly exist just to set up something from a future DC movie in the way that sometimes maybe we look at some of these MCU series and we're like, what exactly is the purpose of this? This was a way to really tie it back into the universe, but like showcase what we usually get within the first 5 minutes of a Batman movie, which is the origin story of a villain. This was an 8 hour origin story to look inside the mind of one of Gotham's biggest baddies. And it was so great to enjoy. I've said this so many times, but I'll say it once more here, Grace, that I'll admit the first couple of episodes, I was like, all right, I'm intrigued, but like, is this just going to be generic crime show that happens to take place in Gotham? But honestly, once we started getting Bliss on the scene, I was blissful about
Yeah.
all of this. I think especially getting to realize that it was less so a show about Oz and more so like a two-hander between Oz and Sophia, but then you also have sort of like late surges in Vic and in Francis at the same time that makes for an incredibly compelling ensemble that all kind of falls apart at a fever pitch. That's what's
Hmm.
really fun about this episode as well, is that it was only fated to go one way, which is that Oz was going to prevail at the cost of pretty much everybody else. And there is so much beauty that exists within that tragedy of letting us get to know so much of what makes these other people tick, how they were informed and built by their families or lack thereof, by the circumstances around them or lack thereof. And then to basically have their lives all just shattered apart
Hmm.
by this man in some way. It's such a great way to sort of like start from one POV, build out your perspective into this wonderful universe, and then focus it all on one singular point at the
Yeah.
end. When you look at the
Crown
overall,
Point.
yeah, when the overall like point, the overall shape of the story is really really cool in retrospect, Grace. And this is definitely something that will be on my rewatch list as we get closer to the Batman Part 2. And to your earlier point, I'll be really intrigued to see how much groundwork was laid down in those opening
Hmm.
episodes towards some of the revelations we got towards the end of it.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I feel like, I did ask this question very early on, like, why are we doing this? And that was like not rhetorical. Like I was literally asking, and it was not like I don't think we should be making this. I'm intrigued. I do think after seeing the full season, I think it was worth for me spending
Yeah,
8+ hours, I think, maybe a little bit less, spending time seeing who Oswald Cobb is. Not only do I think it was like a pretty fascinating character study, but I do think it really enhanced the Batman universe in the sense that when we go back to the Batman, which is confirmed, like I think that will help. Also, like they got to play in this world, so it's like not just like from like there's this thing I feel like a lot of people feel right now is like when you go and watch the eventual sequel, like, oh, I have so much homework to do, or like I haven't watched it.
exactly.
I really do feel like the trajectory they take us on, what I think could happen is that you could go watch the Batman and then go watch the Batman Part 2, and Penguin will have become kind of like more in line with what you kind of thought he might have been in the first one. I don't know that people will necessarily feel like they have to go and do this. Like,
Yeah,
I,
this is not a multiverse of madness where it's like, wait, who are these two young boys? Why does Wanda care about that? Okay, I guess I have to watch an entire TV series to understand the context.
yeah, we met him, and he's just becoming he. This was the journey of making him basically like the Batman villain that we is closer to the Batman villain that we know from like comic books and other movies. And so I think from that sense, like I think this is well worth watching, and I think if you like the Batman, you will like the show. But I don't know that like people are going to necessarily. I don't feel like people are going to necessarily have to like watch this whole thing right before the Batman comes out. But I feel like it will enhance the Batman Part 2, whether or not people realize they watch the show or not, because they got this like the executive producers of the show, Matt Reeves, got to spend like 8 hours in this universe, really fleshing this out. Lauren LaFranca has said she's eager to tell more stories here. Whether or not
Okay.
that means that's the Penguin, or could we set up a different villain? Could we return? Could we be more focusing on Selena Kyle? And what would be interesting is like, is the season 2 version, Mike? Like, okay, basically, like if you take Sophia as like the Sophia from like Sophia at the end of the show is kind of where Oz was in the movie, and now we like if we did another season where it's like, how does Sophia become the Hangman that is the Batman villain for a future? Like, there's that I think on the table. I think that kind of dilutes the story of Sophia in the season, but I think it's still on the table. There's a lot of opportunity here, but no answers yet as to whether we'll get another season.
No, and that's okay for now. I think again, if we look across the pond here proverbially at another major comic book pop culture empire, it's possible to like really get high on your own supply incredibly early and feel like everybody needs a spin-off. And again, when you don't have a POV that works for a TV show, then it really doesn't become worth it, even if it's meant to be connective tissue back to a cinematic source. And again, I feel like this stood on its own. And it seems like again with James Gunn generally retooling and focusing on the DCEU, with this kind of being the last remnant of what came before. I imagine we're not going to get anything before the Batman Part 2. If anything, I would imagine that the Batman Part 2 is going to introduce another version of another iconic Batman villain. Maybe we get it more into the political side and Harvey Dent gets involved as an example. And then if he plays a minimal role, then maybe we get a spin-off show based on that. So unfortunately, I think this is like our last dalliance into Gotham for the time being. But I think it's also interesting to your point about Matt Reeves spending time here is another reason why I really enjoyed it is I just love world building. I talked about
Yeah.
this with House of the Dragon season 2 about how much I enjoyed just spending time with the people in King's Landing, the rank and file, and we got that a lot in Gotham. That's what arguably bails Oz out at the end of the day, is that he is able to speak towards a POV that honestly doesn't get talked about a lot because the main protagonist of the Batman series is a Nepo baby, is a rich kid
Mm-hmm.
who grows up in a mansion and has a bunch of fancy gadgets to him. So I really enjoyed the perspective of it, getting to see from like Vic's POV, for example, how so much of the devastation that comes sort of as a byproduct of all the crazy shit going on in Gotham can like really impact a person. I thought it was as impressive as it was to tell a story about some of our main characters. It also interestingly told a story about like the societal status of Gotham and how canonically it could be a town that seems to just have so much shit going on in it at any point in time. And that's because like there's not a lot of great stuff going on there.
Yeah. Um, Well, we've gone a little bit. Like, this is our longest pod of the season. All right, fair enough for the finale. I'll leave one lingering question for the audience to answer. You can send us a
Ooh.
tweet or reply on the YouTube, which is this show seems to have done really well on HBO in terms of viewership. It has incredible ratings, like sort of on the aggregate sites of Rotten Tomatoes and IMDb. It's done incredibly well. Does this? There's really only like a couple of ways in which superheroes have broken through into the awards seasons.
Mm.
The Batman universe has had some success with its villains
I was gonna
before.
say there's no Joker here, so that unfortunately means it will not get acknowledged for anything.
Well, it's definitely not getting nominated for an Oscar because it's a television show. So, fair enough. Television is a little bit more sparse over the years. Watchmen is kind of like the most superhero-y prestige thing. I don't know. I'm interested. I do feel like if I'm looking at the end of by the end of the Emmy season, and I'm looking at some of these performances and the writing and the costuming and all of stuff, I feel like it's could be well deserving of some nods. So I'm going to ask. That's my like leave it to the audience to respond to us post the episode.
Yeah.
You have initial thoughts on that,
I
Mike?
will, and I completely agree. I'll also give some flowers to Colin Farrell here. I know we kind of skipped over his own sort of be careful what you wish for a moment when he like realizes that his mom is in a coma, but like to see him fly into such a rage to just like the camera lingering on his face as he is like begging and pleading with Frances to tell him that she's proud of him, which again is that validation that he seeks so much, even though it's so incredibly self-serving to like him actually weeping. I mean, it's interesting because we've seen his eyes certainly brim with tears a couple times, but like this is far and away the most vulnerable we have ever seen Oz Cobb, and just goes to show how much Francis was his North Star at the end of the day. Yes, he did a lot of it for himself, but the fact that like he did all of this again to justify an ending that ultimately did not come until he got Eve to essentially play the part. And to have him, even just the small gesture of like him putting her hand on the back of his head to like try to force that proximity, right? That warmth of human touch from essentially a cold body, I thought was such an invigorating performance.
I will say I was looking back at my fact checking. WandaVision got like 23 Emmy nominations.
I mean,
So like
yeah,
there's
Agatha all along, I believe got Robert
Mhm.
Lopez the EGOT, but I don't
Right.
remember if like performance wise they won a lot.
Yeah. So and I will say even like the other ones like have nominated like Falcon the Winter Soldier got some nominations. The Boys got an outstanding drama series nom. That to
Right.
me is probably the most like if they nominated The Boys for what I think is season 1 of the
Yeah, and
show.
I think
Oh, it might
Anthony
actually be
Starr may have
season
got
2.
Anthony
No.
Starr, I think, got nominated for an Emmy as well, if I'm remembering correctly. Maybe he didn't.
I actually feel like the bar is a little bit for like the chances that this gets nominated for any like Emmy and like significant Emmys is what I would like classify that as seems higher than like a typical superhero fair being nominated for like a top line Oscar. So I feel actually pretty good about that looking at like
Yeah,
the
I mean,
history there.
listen, HBO certainly, towards
That's
the end
true.
days of post show recaps. Grace, I know you did a podcast as to like what does HBO look like next in a post Succession, post Game of Thrones world, and I feel like we're keeping up a good streak so far. We had House of the Dragon season 2, which went over well for people. The Penguin, I think, again went over really well for people. What's up next? Dune? Is Dune up next?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I can announce that I believe that Dune Prophecy, we will be doing weekly recaps of Dune Prophecy
Woo!
here, releasing. I will be sticking around HBO Sunday night, and I'm going to be, we have a lovely crew. If you're a fan of the show Raised by Wolves, it's a Raised by Wolves reunion. Mother and father are back. Josh Wigler, Taron Armstrong, and I will be recapping all episodes of Dune Prophecy. So very excited for that. Yeah.
When does Dune Prophecy premiere? Is it going to be like the week
It's
after
next
this finishes?
It's next week, Mike. It's next Sunday. So
Wow.
yeah, November
Well, you know
17th.
what else? You know what else is coming out next week, Grace?
Yes.
On November 11th on 11/11, back during again the days or not, I believe the 15th actually. Even
The
though
15th. Yeah.
I did make a wish that the show would come back. So Apple TV last year released an adaptation of the Silo series, which is this like big sci-fi series, takes place in this dystopian world where the remnants of humanity live inside this like 100+ foot silo that's
Mhm.
full of plenty of mysteries. It was adapted into a TV series starring, speaking of Dune, Rebecca Ferguson as the main
That's right.
character alongside Rashida Jones, David Oyelowo, Common was there as well. I got to cover that with Dr. Amanda, and as someone who read the book, it blew me away. Still, it deviated so much from the source material, but in a way
Mhm.
that still felt incredibly invigorating. And also just scratched the surface of the source material, but still in a very big way. It's coming back for season 2, and if you liked this pairing, folks,
Mm,
expect more of it. Grace, I am so excited to have you as my deputy in this proverbial sheriff's
yes.
department. We're going to be covering Silo season 2 together,
Yes.
starting with the first episode on the 15th.
Very excited for this. I think Silos is such a better name than the name of the first book, which was called Wool. But
Yes.
it's fine. Silo, it should be very fun, Mike. Apple TV, they love their S shows, and Silo is certainly one of them, returning for season 2. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can check that out as well. Just everything on We Know Scripted TV. Again, we're starting to now open ourselves up to covering more shows on an episodic basis, and also happy to swing in and do this as well with you, Grace. This was a
Yes.
really fun surprise of a show, I think, for us as well as many people, and I was so honored to get to shit shotgun with your driving this proverbial purple car through these podcast streets.
That's right. Appreciate everybody who listens. We had a nice shout out from Eric, who thanked us for
Oh,
the hour. This is, when you put it this way, it does sound weird, for the hours of entertainment and company that we shared with them. So appreciate anybody else who feels the same way, or if you didn't enjoy it but you're still listening, that's also much appreciated. I think people were ahead of us on really loving the show, Meg. I think that we
yeah.
were coming in a little bit like, okay, maybe, but people were like, what do you mean? This is amazing. So very happy to have been able to cover this show. I think it was tremendous, and I would agree that a little bit of a surprise, because I think there was this like world where this show fell flat, I think, a little bit, and some of the preseason hype of like Colin Farrell hated it was like, it turned
Oh
out to be
yeah,
pretty exceptional. So
and also, let's face it, like, this state of superhero culture is
true.
not at its most hype. I think there's a lot of discourse about, like, okay, is it now just kind of becoming cookie cutter, studio produced schlock that we have to sit down for 6 hours to understand a plot point in a movie? And this, to me, harkens back to some of the best that superhero culture can do, of like using it as a background to make a show that does really get complicated.
Yeah. All right. Well, in addition to Silo coverage and Dune Prophecy coverage, I also have the Tastemakers each week. The weekend program is happening each week. Mike, you also have TV for real happening. Anything
Mhm.
else you want to let people know about?
Yeah, so still covering BSG. We are
Right.
escaping the dark, dismal world of Gotham. Not so much in the world of Battlestar Galactica, but it's been a lot of fun covering that with Josh Regler. We're doing that on a weekly basis, making our way through season 3. I'm also covering Survivor, which is going strong in season 47, both in
Yes.
written form and on the B&B. And I'm sure there's plenty to be other stuff that pops up in the meantime, but you can check out everything I'm doing at a Mike Bloom Type.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Hi From Grace. That's it. Again, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of our other episodes and our episodic coverage of shows. But that's it for us. Until next time, bye bye and wah wah.